the term zero waste freaks people out. It's just a goal. It's not an absolute, and you're not failing if you're not 100% zero waste. Nobody is 100% zero waste. Even if I don't bring any plastic into my home, the stuff that I buy has some waste involved with its production that I don't see. So it's a little bit of NIMBY, not in my backyard. So, just do your best. It's the same with plastic free. It's just a goal. You never actually get there.
Welcome to the Wise Consumer Podcast, the answer to your eco-friendly and healthy lifestyle questions. How to reduce your exposure to harmful chemicals, whether or not it's normal to have a painful period, how to live an eco-friendly lifestyle on a budget, and more. With the help of experts, I'm talking scientists, toxicologists, endocrinologists, cosmetic chemists, you'll get knowledge and know-how to your most pressing health concerns and sustainability questions straight from the source. I'm Madeline Weisskopf, your host, confidant, and in-house science nerd, here on a mission to help empower, inspire, and support you in your own health and eco journey. Because, friend, I am a firm believer that if you don't feel good, you can't do good. So, pour yourself a cup of tea, kick off your shoes, take a deep breath, and let's get started. Hey, friend. Welcome back to another episode of the Wise Consumer Podcast. I am thrilled to share today's conversation with cookbook author, blogger, fermenter, and sourdough baker, Anne-Marie Bonneau, aka the ZeroWaste Chef, with you today. I have been a fan of Anne-Marie's work since the beginning of my ZeroWaste journey, so having her on the podcast is truly an honor, especially as someone who loves to cook and is always searching for simple tips and tricks to reduce food waste in the kitchen, which is, of course, as you'll hear, Anne-Marie's specialty. So I hope you're ready and as excited as I am because we're about to cover a lot of ground in today's episode. Today, Anne-Marie and I chat about the challenges she faced at the beginning of her zero waste living journey, why zero waste living isn't an all or nothing proposition, and how she defines zero waste. She also shares simple tips on how to reduce food waste in the kitchen, which, believe it or not, is not always about bulk food shopping, how to cook a la zero waste, the benefits of cutting down on food and packaging waste in the kitchen, the importance of supporting your local farmers, her major recipe fails, and so much more. This was such a fun, encouraging, and insightful conversation. So without further ado, here's Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie, thank you so much for being on the Wise Consumer Podcast. I cannot tell you what an honor it is to have you. So thank you for being here and sharing your story and mission with us.
Oh, well, thank you very much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I have to be totally transparent with you. When I first started my conscious living journey a few years ago, there were two people who were super influential and instrumental in my journey. Catherine Kellogg from Going Zero Waste being one of them, and then you yourself. And I feel like I'm like such a fan kid where I'm like, oh, I'm talking to Anne-Marie Bonneau right now. Like, this is amazing. So I'm like very excited to be connecting with you and sharing everything that you've done.
Oh, well, thank you. Thanks for following along.
Yeah, I have been following on since I've started. So I don't know how I came across your blog. I just did one day, and I love food. I'm French American, so I'm always looking into food and recipes. And so then when I saw, oh my gosh, I didn't think about going, like more sustainable in the kitchen until I came across your blog. Well, I had, because I was raised very much like my mom would make vegetable soups, using everything that I absolutely hated. But looking back, I'm like, she was already being sustainable before I even knew there was such a thing, But I want to start with you at the beginning. Well, not at the beginning because we'll be here forever. But for people who aren't, as aware of the work you're doing or who don't know you, I would love for you to share a little bit about, what led you here. Because my guess is 20 years ago, you were like, in 20 years on my vision board, I will have, write a zero waste cookbook and host a blog and talk about zero waste. So what is it that led you here? How did you get to where you are today?
Well, 10 years ago in 2011, I read about this catamaran called the Plastiki, And a group of environmentalists built it out of waste materials, including 12,500 discarded plastic bottles. So those were the flotation devices of
Yeah.
the catamaran. And they sailed it from San Francisco, I lived just south of there, to Sydney, Australia to raise awareness of the plastic gyres swirling around in the oceans. I had no idea plastic was swirling around in the oceans. I
Yeah.
knew plastic was bad. You know, I remember even as a teenager learning that you have to cut the rings from soda cans,
Yep.
so that birds don't get entangled on it. So, but I thought, well, I'm putting the stuff in the recycling bin and it's being turned into other things, which we're all learning now that's not the case. So that raised my awareness. And my daughter, Mary Catherine, she was 16 at the time. And I remember saying to her, we have to get off of plastic. This is just horrifying. It's heartbreaking. Once you see those images of the albatrosses
Yeah.
feeding the plastic to their young,
Yeah.
there's no turning back. I think almost everyone who sees those images, they want to do something. So Mary Catherine said, okay, to kicking plastic. And we had our first trip to the grocery store, and the plastic was everywhere. And I remember standing with her in the bathroom tissue aisle and throwing my hands in the air and saying, how are we ever going to do this? This is impossible. So then Mary Catherine started to do all of the research and figure out what we needed to do. We started shopping at the farmers market religiously. We're spoiled. We live in Northern California, so the market runs year round.
Yeah.
And started buying things in bulk. I remember how excited we were when we discovered that we could take our containers to the bulk store to fill them directly. And just, it took months, but we made all of these little steps and swaps. And we've always been big into cooking.
Mm-hmm.
And we realized, most of the plastic's coming from food, coming from the kitchen. So I baked bread since Mary Catherine was a baby, but I used baker's yeast. So when we decided to cut the plastic, I eventually started making sourdough because I had an inkling that I didn't need to buy yeast, and I didn't want to buy it anymore because it comes in either those little packets or, a jar. Anyway, and I love to eliminate extra ingredients that I don't need. And sourdough is so simple. It's bread, water, and salt.
Yeah. If you know how to make bread, I'm like, which we're going to get to. Because I've tried baking bread before, and that's one thing I wanted to ask you. Was like, my bread came out, and my mom makes bread. As I mentioned, she's French, and so when she came to the US, she was like, there's no good like French bread, so she started making her own.
Oh yeah.
I tried, and it was a major flop, which I'm guaranteeing most of my listeners, not everyone, but a few may have tried. So I do want to talk about cooking and stuff. But anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt. So you started making your bread.
Yeah, well, start making sourdough. But I mean, just buy the bread. You don't have to bake the bread. Yeah. You don't have to, I don't expect everybody to make all the stuff I make. I've always been a maker. Ever since I was little, I've loved to make things. And so, but that's just me. And I never say, oh, you must all live like I do. So just buy the bread.
And
you
not
can
feel
take
guilty.
A cloth bag to a bakery and have them put it in.
True.
There is no shame in that.
True.
And you're helping a small business.
Absolutely.
Which is important.
See, this is why I wanted to have this conversation, which kind of leads me right into the next point is that, in your book, you have this quote that I love, and you say, it's okay to live a bit zero waste. And I think that's so important because just like you said, where like I would feel guilty because I'm not making my own bread. I'm not necessarily making my own yogurts. But the reality is I can just go to the local bakery, bring my bag, maybe pre-COVID, and support a local business or buy my yogurt from the farmer's market if there's one, So I think there's different alternatives, but I'd love to hear your point of view on this.
Well, the term zero waste freaks people out. It's just a goal. It's not an absolute, and you're not failing if you're not 100% zero waste. Nobody is 100% zero waste. if I don't bring any plastic into my home, the stuff that I buy has some waste involved with its production that I don't see. So it's a little bit of NIMBY, not in my backyard. So, just do your best. It's the same with plastic free. It's just a goal. It's you never actually get there. So when I first started my blog, so math is my first love. And so when I first started my blog, I wanted to call it Approaching Zero Waste, because in calculus, you approach zero.
Yeah.
You don't actually get to zero. But it was long, and, not everybody's going to appreciate that. So
I don't know. To be honest, math is not my forte. So I don't even think I would have picked up on like, oh, she's making a calculus reference.
Yeah. Well, plus, but also, yeah, you never get there.
Right.
You never get, then it's fine. It's the journey that's, I think, important, and getting started and just, doing something. And I mention in my book, if we have just everyone cutting 10% of their waste, we would make a huge difference. Because I have a little chart in my book, a little graph, and I figure everyone who reads my book, maybe 1% are going to go full on 100% zero waste, or, as close to it as they can. Hardly anybody's going to do that. And I do the math, and I show, like, the on the graph, the biggest chunk is everybody doing 10% compared to 1% doing everything. So it's really important just to have everybody on board. And unfortunately, a little bit zero waste movement just doesn't sound as catchy as zero waste movement.
It's true.
Not a good hashtag.
Yeah, it's a little bit harder to campaign. A little bit zero waste, everyone. Yeah, for sure. There's
yeah.
Absolutely. So you mentioned like where to start. So for you, I want to start with some of the challenges that you first faced. Like you said, you went to the grocery store. You didn't do it overnight. For you personally,
no.
Yeah, what were some of the biggest challenges you faced at first?
Well, I guess figuring out a new routine, it did. It took months. So we had to figure out where to shop, because that first trip, we went to a Safeway. There was one really close to our home, and we shopped there quite a bit. And there was hardly anything I could buy in there.
Yeah.
Some stuff in the produce section. And I shopped at Trader Joe's a lot before we cut our waste. But I still, even back then, I would not buy the produce, because, you don't need apples in clamshells. It was crazy. I think Trader Joe's has improved a little bit since then.
Yeah.
But was a lot of plastic. So I had to figure out where to shop, and you kind of get your routine down, even to the point where, at the bulk store, I know which cashier's line to stand in, because, if there's a new cashier, they might get confused about the tear on the jar. So I know, oh no, go to that blonde guy, because he's really good and he never makes mistakes. So you kind of get your routine down, but yeah, it takes a while. And personal care was hard. I think that was one of the hardest things at first. Shampoo I found really difficult. So I at first washed my hair with baking soda, and then did a vinegar rinse, and that worked pretty well. The one store near me does have bulk shampoo.
Mm-hmm.
So they have a giant jug of shampoo, and you can put some in a bottle. And, it's better than buying a bunch of small bottles. But now I mostly use a shampoo bar. And then I follow with a vinegar rinse, because I find the shampoo bar leaves like some slick of something, residue on my hair. And the vinegar rinse works really well. It also detangles your hair. And there are conditioner bars too. So that was really hard, because back then there weren't a lot of shampoo bars. And the one that I did find had palm oil in it. And so I didn't want to use that. Toothpaste was hard. Mary Catherine made me toothpaste. Deodorant was hard. Mary Catherine made me deodorant. I remember trying to solve deodorant and shampoo at the same time. It was hard.
Do you still use deodorant, baking soda in your deodorant? Because my journey to zero waste deodorant was pretty painful for
Oh
both
no.
myself, but everyone around me, if you know what I'm saying. Like,
Oh
it was bad. I was so excited to try zero waste deodorant. And I tried this one particular brand. And I remember just walking around with my arms down. I could not lift my arms. I couldn't hug people because it just, let's just, for lack of a better word, stunk. Um,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I had to try a whole bunch of different ones. I finally found one that I really like. Same with shampoo. The first shampoo bars that I used, I was so excited. And it literally looked like I'd washed my hair with olive oil. I was like, wow, this is not helpful.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
so for you, are you using, is there a brand that you like now, or do you still use like baking soda, your own baking soda deodorant and toothpaste?
So let's see. Right now, I'm using little tooth tabs to brush
Hmm.
my teeth. I happen to there's a store near me that's well, or not. It's not that close to me, but I was in that area recently, and they have tooth tabs in bulk.
Oh,
So I bought
wow.
probably a 6 month supply. Before that, I had been using baking soda, and sometimes I'll make my own toothpaste. I use homemade deodorant. It has baking soda in it, which some people find irritating, but
Yeah.
it doesn't bother me. And I use not even a pea size, not even the size of a pea, like just a tiny amount, and it works really well. People have told me they have put in arrowroot powder
Mm.
instead of baking soda, and that works. But I haven't tried it, and I know there are deodorant brands out there. I haven't tried any because this homemade stuff, it just works so well. And I'll make 6 months worth at a time in a jar, and then it costs pennies. And then shampoo, I use a shampoo bar. It's from the bulk store near me. It's a company in Oregon that makes it, and I haven't found much difference between shampoo bars. Like I've never tried one and going, oh wow, this one's the best. I've have tried a couple that were just terrible at the
Uh-huh.
very beginning. Yeah, I tried one at the very beginning, was just awful.
Yeah.
So yeah, but that was awkward. It was, I don't know if I wrote this in my book or not, or maybe it's on my blog. It was like zero waste adolescence. It was this awkward phase that I went through, where
Yes.
my hair looked bad and I smelled. I was the same way. I smelled. I used that crystal deodorant, it's like a
Yeah.
rock crystal,
Yeah.
and you wet it, and then I had to go to a meeting at work, and I'm so embarrassed because it didn't. I mean, I still shudder. I remember that meeting, and I just shudder when I think about it.
I
We're in a closed room.
Yes, I love the adolescence, zero waste adolescence. That's such a great term. And growing up, the one question people always used to ask when they found out that I was French is like, oh, French people don't use deodorant, right? So when I started smelling because I was trying zero waste deodorant, I was even more self conscious because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm that French person who stinks.
Oh,
But really, I was just going through my zero waste adolescence phase, which is such a great way. And I think for anyone listening, like if this is any indication, like it's okay, you're going to go through a journey. Like some people just don't want to do it. And I'll say there are some amazing zero waste brands that are wrapped in paper, or that upcycle the plastic. So if you don't want to make your own deodorant, that's okay,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can just buy the stuff. It's fine. Like I said at the beginning, I like to make stuff. It's just the way I am. But yeah, you don't have to make everything. And actually, my dream would be, so I lived in an intentional community for 15 years, and I had to leave because of COVID.
Oh.
I got displaced
Yeah. Yeah. Explain what
during COVID.
an intentional living community is for anyone who may not be familiar.
Oh, right. So yeah, when I first heard it, I thought, what? So there are different types of communities. An intentional community can be a co-op. It can be, a bunch of people sharing a house. It can be a village, a small village of houses. Mine was in, the heart of Silicon Valley. It was an apartment complex, but it has has a theme. And the theme of mine was, yoga and meditation. So it's a spiritual community, and most of us had our own units. There are some people who live above the community room, and the community room has a community kitchen, and there are community dinners in there. Well, before COVID, community dinners 4 nights a week, vegetarian, and people volunteer to cook and clean, and you can eat in there if you want to. You don't have to, or you can eat at home. There's a temple on the grounds. You can go and meditate 24/7. It's open all the time. And I loved it.
Yeah.
And it was really nice. I mean, when my kids were little, it was great. If I needed a babysitter, just go knock on someone's door and say, hey, can you watch Charlotte? Oh, sure, no problem. I mean,
So
I don't know
nice.
what I would have done without it. So, like, my dream is to have, there would be these little communities all over. And I think maybe, I don't know, maybe in the old days we had more community. Like,
Yeah.
here where I live now in my house, I don't know my neighbors at all.
Yeah.
I don't even know their names.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
That's so funny.
But
Yeah.
if we lived in these little communities, people could specialize. So, one person would be in charge of the bread, and one person would be in charge of the kombucha, and someone else would make all the deodorant. And then everybody, oh yeah, there are gardens at the community too. So there were all sorts of vegetable gardens and a fruit orchard. So, hippie utopia.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. It sounds like an idyllic village where that's the way people kind of used to live. If you think about it, there was the baker who was in charge of the bread. There was a butcher who was in charge of the meat.
Right.
The candlestick maker, if I were to go down the line, the cobbler.
Yeah.
So we definitely have walked away from that a little bit. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned like community living, because I was just talking to my sister is about to give birth, but with COVID especially, but we're all over the map. And it's just, I was talking to my parents, and what you realize is you're kind of left on your own in the way that things are, at least here in the States. You don't, unless you live near your family and you have a great sense of community. Like, I'm military spouse, I'm moving all the time. It's like, you have to try to build your community. So I love this idea of a community coming together and supporting each other. And I love that idea.
Yeah, I think it's really important as we, address the climate crisis. We have to learn to cooperate and work together. Yeah.
Well, Anne-Marie, I would be remiss to have the Zero Waste Chef on and not ask you all the questions, because I know my listeners are eager to get tips and tricks and takeaways from you. So I want to start in the kitchen, because after all, you are the Zero Waste Chef. I think a super simple way to reduce food waste is by freezing food. But I think a lot of us get really confused. Like, can you freeze eggs? Can you freeze cheese? How do you freeze it? What's the best way? How do I make it so that it, is still good once I thaw it? So I'd love for you to just kind of, when it comes to freezing food, what are some good techniques and tips that you have for us?
Well, I freeze a lot of stuff. I use wide mouth glass jars for, everything. I do have some metal containers, but not very many of those, and I'll freeze stuff in there. But a wide mouth jar with, flush sides. You don't want anything with a neck on it, because if you freeze liquids in that, even if you think you've left enough headspace, you may not have, and it can freeze. And then if there's a neck, it will break it off. So, eggs, if you want to freeze eggs, you whisk them up first and then throw them in a jar, freeze them. Cheese, you can put that in a jar too, maybe. So I haven't frozen. Actually, no, that's not true. I used to buy whole wheels of cheese, and then I would shred up a lot of it and freeze the shredded cheese. So that's right. I don't eat much cheese anymore. That's going to be hard for a French person.
Yeah.
I imagine.
But I'm not going to be freezing my camembert or something like that. Would just be awkward. I think that'd be very anti-French.
Oh, yeah. No, so I'm from Canada, and I remember when the Canadian government wanted to do something like ban raw cheese, and people in Quebec freaked out. Completely freaked out. Anyway, so the Canadian government backed off on that one. But hard cheese. It was hard cheese that I would freeze. And I freeze, let's see, I freeze broth. I freeze the scraps that I accumulate to make the broth. So when I'm prepping vegetables, I save the little ends of onions and bits of carrots and bell peppers and whatnot. And I put those in jars and put them in the freezer. And then when I have enough, I will simmer them in water and then strain them. And then I have my broth. If I don't use it right away, I'll freeze it. I freeze broth from cooking beans because that stuff it's tasty and it's kind of thick from the beans. And so that's great to add to soup or to cook lentils in. If it's black bean broth, I'll add it to my sourdough discard chocolate cake.
Wow.
Oh, and I'll throw in some orange zest. Yeah.
You'll take bean broth and put it in your cake?
Yeah. So the chocolate, it's sourdough discard vegan chocolate cake. It's on my blog. If you bake sourdough, then you can accumulate a lot of discard from feedings. So you have to find something to do with it. And one of the things I make is this chocolate cake. It calls for water, but if I have black bean broth, unsalted, I'll use that instead of water. And I think it just adds some richness to the cake. And I'll also add orange zest during citrus season. It's really hard for me to eat an orange without zesting it first because it adds so much flavor to food.
Yeah.
So I'll zest my oranges, not all of them because I only have so many tiny jars for orange zest. But I freeze a lot of it in the little tiny Bonne Maman jars. And then when I make my cake, I'll just pull one out and throw that in.
Yeah. So I think a common misconception though is like, doesn't glass explode once it's frozen?
So I haven't had that problem. I know people do occasionally. I'll get that comment. Every once in a while, I'll post on social media, here's my freezer, here are some frozen jars. And so there might be one person, who says, my jar's exploded. And I'm not sure exactly why, but there are some precautions you can take. So I mentioned don't fill the jar all the way. I would wait until the food is cool before sticking it in the freezer. Other people have said freezing the food with the lid off helps. And then once it's frozen, put the lid on. So you just have to be careful about how your open jar in the freezer. Just have to be careful when you open and close the freezer. I've also heard with the lid on, putting the jar on its side. So people have told me these different tricks, but I haven't had a problem. Also, when you thaw it, don't take a frozen jar out of the freezer and dunk it in hot water to try and thaw it because that can cause it to break. And my mom used to make freezer jam when I was little, and she used special jars for that. So if you're worried, maybe do that. They were ball jars or mason jars that apparently are better for freezing, but I just use whatever jar. I love peanut butter jars, Bonne Maman jars. They're the perfect size. Yeah. So I freeze a lot in those.
I do too. And I think the key is to, like you said, not fill it up all the way. I also love the tip of letting your food cool down before you put it in. And I think to follow up, marking your stuff down so you know like how old it is, if it's in the freezer, for how long.
Yeah. Occasionally I'll find a mystery jar in the freezer. I'll think, now, what was that?
Yes.
And sometimes after I thaw it, sometimes you can't tell when it's frozen. And then I'll thaw it. Oh, it's pizza sauce.
Do you get your meat bulk as well? And I ask this because I'm wondering, do you freeze your own meat then? Like, do you buy meat that is, from the butcher counter or whatever? How do you go about working with meat when you're trying to extend it and keep it safe?
Well, I don't eat that much meat.
I would just say if you eat meat.
Yeah, but so I'll eat meat if it's pasture raised and rotationally grazed.
Yeah.
And I can get at my own container.
Yeah.
So, which is hard. But the other day, my daughter, who she doesn't eat hardly any meat, and I'm really surprised she wanted salmon because she's been getting migraines
Mm.
really regularly. And
Mm.
she's thinking it's a lack of omega-3s. She was reading up. And so she said, why don't we have some salmon? I mean, I was shocked that she actually bought salmon because Charlotte hasn't eaten meat or fish in quite a while. But
Yeah.
anyway, so I said, okay, take the container. And so she did that. I have one big Tupperware container. It's about, I don't know, 7 by 6 by 6. Anyway, it's a square container and it's kind of deep. And I've had that for well before we went plastic free. And I wasn't about to just throw it in the garbage. So it's good for stuff like that. So Charlotte took it to the counter and she asked, can you put the salmon in here? And the butcher's or fishmonger said, sure, no problem, and put it in. And we didn't freeze it, but you could just put that whole container in the freezer. So you can do that. Lunch bots are a type of metal lunch container, and we have a bunch of those. Those are really good too. Or even a jar. You can ask them if you buy something like ground turkey, you can take a jar and ask them, can you put it in there? So I'm not sure what it's like where you are in DC. Here in California, in Northern California, where I am, it's been harder to get stores to put stuff in containers since COVID, even though there is no law saying that stores can't do it. And I know this because someone from the city of Palo Alto looked into it for me, someone from waste management there, because I want to start this program here where stores that are allowing you to bring in your own containers, they put a little sticker in the window that says BYO. And then, you're walking down the street and you want a snack and you have your container and you see the sticker and you just know, I can go in there and get a snack. I don't have to go through the spiel. Excuse me, will you please put my food in this container because I'm trying to reduce plastic waste, and yes, it's clean, and yes, you've done it before. And no, you take the weight off first, you just hand it over because they know.
Is that becoming prominent where you are? Is that like a kind of, it is definitely not. I'm right outside of the DC area, and I will say most of the places that I've lived, and I lived in Southern California where it was also, I think more and more stores are becoming, zero waste or open to that idea, but it's definitely not a common occurrence.
No, it's not that. It's not. I went with my older daughter. She had an appointment downtown Palo Alto, and I went with her and I said, oh, well, I'll just go get a cup of tea while you're at your hair appointment. And I could not get a cup of tea. It was either only throwaway cups or the tea bags were plastic.
Yeah.
I couldn't get loose leaf tea in a real cup. I could only get the plastic bags in a real cup or loose leaf in a paper cup. I was like, I cannot get a cup of tea. This is insane. So I hope that more businesses are going to offer, allow people to bring usables. And actually, there are some new ordinances in the city of Palo Alto anyway. They're going to ban all kinds of single-use plastic. And a lot of that was supposed to go into effect last year, but then with COVID, I think they, delayed it. So yeah, eventually it will become more normal because it is normal. Like, how is it not normal to say, hold up a cup and say, please put my drink in this?
Yeah. We've become such a society of convenience where it's like such a pain in the what to be like, oh, I forgot my cup, or, oh, I didn't bring my utensils, or, again, going back to how things were back in the day, that is the way it was, and I think it's like not convenient for a lot of people. It's so much more convenient to just go into, I don't know, let's say Starbucks and get your cup. Although I'll give people credit because I think more and more people are starting to use reusables and everything. But that leads me to my next question. For those who are, for instance, in an area where there's not access to even fresh produce, and I'll be talking about food insecurity with a few other guests, so we don't need to get into that right now. But like, what are your tips for someone who is maybe, for lack of a better word, either time poor because they just do not have time, to make things themselves, or, but they want to be more sustainable, and, or they don't live in an area where any of this is available because it's rural or far away from like where it's quote unquote the norm, or more normalized, I should say? What are your tips for that individual?
Yeah, I hear from people regularly, and especially during COVID, saying,
Mhm.
we have no bulk bins. What am I supposed to do?
Right.
So let's say you want to buy some rice, if you can't get it in bulk, then maybe think about buying the biggest package you can buy. Because if your family can eat 10 pounds of rice, then maybe buy the 10-pound bag or the 25-pound bag, because that's a lot less packaging than a bunch of small bags. So you can reduce the packaging waste that way. And then, it's not just about buying stuff in bulk. When we cut our waste, we started eating more whole fruit, or sorry, whole vegetables, whole foods. Sorry, I'm not making
No,
sense.
you absolutely are.
We
Yeah.
started eating more whole foods.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you cut the processed food, the highly processed food, you're going to cut a lot of the waste, because a lot of the highly processed food comes in those shiny packages. Now, if you don't have access to that, I mean, that's really hard. If you don't have access to fresh food, all you have are convenience stores around you. I mean, we need to fix the whole food system,
Yeah.
right? Because too many people don't have access to
Yep.
real food, right? And we subsidize all the stuff that's bad for us.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
I think in my book I said, don't feel guilty for a supply chain that you didn't create. There's, we didn't create this crazy system. We're swimming upstream. So, just do what you can.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of the biggest takeaway here is, if you have access to fresh produce and, a zero waste bulk store and, yes, maybe it's a pain if you have to explain it, but if you can do it, great. But if you don't, and I've traveled through and even lived in areas where, you have to drive 500 miles to the closest maybe Whole Foods, equivalent, or a nature
Wow.
store. You know what I mean? When you're in the middle of the country like that, where
Yeah, yeah.
you're farm after farm, and I'm talking like industrial farms. And then, maybe there's a 7-Eleven, but you're not going to get all your produce. You can get your milk and maybe, some frozen things, or there's a Walmart. So I'm very aware that it's like for lack of a better word, it's such a privilege to be able to live in an area where I do have access to fresh produce and I do have access to stores that are open to bulk. Because that's not the case for everyone. And I think that's why even I like your recipes, because you can, even if you don't maybe buy them in bulk, you can still make the most of your ingredients by freezing food and storing food properly. There are other alternatives and other ways that you can still be zero waste in your lifestyle.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, food waste is a huge problem. And I don't think it gets nearly the attention that it deserves. I guess maybe there aren't the equivalent images of albatrosses feeding plastic to their young
Right.
with food waste. There aren't the same horrifying images, but I just tweeted something this morning. I read an article that said food waste, let's see, the percentage of methane gas produced in the US by food waste is okay. I shouldn't say exactly what it was, because I might be wrong. It was double digits. I mean,
Yeah.
it was really high. I mean, it's a big portion of methane, which the IPCC report pointed out. We have to do something about methane.
Yep.
So, I mean, I think almost everyone can reduce their food waste. Maybe they can't reduce their packaging waste because, there are no bulk bins. But, and I've said over and over, I can't think of a downside to reducing food waste. I don't think there is one. You save money. The average American family of four buys something like $1,600 worth of food that goes uneaten every year. I mean, it's a crazy problem. Meanwhile, last year, at the end of 2020, almost 54 million
Jeez.
Americans faced food insecurity. I mean, it's just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
So yeah, the cutting your food waste makes you more creative in the kitchen.
Yeah.
At least that's what I found, because it's kind of like an episode of that show Chopped. I look in the fridge and see what's in there, and then I have to figure out what to make with what I find. And in the old days, I would think, what do I feel like eating tonight? And I would look up a recipe. I would buy all of the ingredients and bring them home and prep the food and cook the food. We'd have the leftover dish and then all of the leftover ingredients, little bits and pieces of this and that. If you do that a few times a week, then you've got a pile of food in the fridge, and chances are some of that's going to go to waste. So by letting the contents of your refrigerator dictate what your next meal will be, you slash the food waste.
Right.
And you come up with like really yummy combinations. I've made some really good discoveries cooking this way. So, and it makes cooking more fun.
Yeah, and
which I think is important.
You call this freestyle cooking, correct?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I really like that term. And I think that, you're just free in the kitchen. I think that's a great way to look at it. You're just free in the kitchen. And I think that's how we learn. You know, people say, well, I'm not a cook. Well, you can't learn something if you don't try it, you know? So see, does a cumin, go with ginger or, whatever, when you're putting your spices together and everything. So I think that's just such a great way of looking at it.
Yeah. And, taste as you go, see what it tastes like. And then, and if you find some dishes that are easily adaptable, if you're not used to this way of cooking, because I can see for someone who doesn't know how to cook, if you say, okay, go make something without a recipe, they're going to say, what?
Yeah.
I don't know how to cook anything. So if you learn how to cook things like soup or dal or, pizza doesn't have to, there's no law saying you have to top it with red sauce. Hand pies, pastry, you can fill pastry with all kinds of things. If you have fruit that's about to, that you need to eat quickly, you can make a fruit crumble. So if you learn how to make some basic things that are highly adaptable, then I would start there and then build out from that.
Yeah. For you, were there any challenges? Like, have you ever tried something with whatever you had, or, an ingredient, and you're like, wow, that was a huge fail? Like, did you go through challenges? What's kind of your creative process? Because you have a lot of recipes on your blog and in your book. And I'm just curious, as a recipe developer myself, like, what's your creative process and what are some of the challenges you face?
Well, when I was working on the book, I wanted it to be like a puzzle. I wanted the recipes to kind of all work together. So you don't make one thing and stop there. I have at the end of most recipes, and now for your next recipe, and I'll tell you, this goes with this recipe on page blah, 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 or you have these little bits of ingredients left. Now take those and go make such and such recipe. So I wanted everything to kind of work together. And so, there were a couple of things that I didn't put in there because they didn't seem to fit with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there were some things. I know there was one recipe I tried over and over and over and over, and I was just determined to put it in there. And then I just realized it's not going to make the cut. I can't make it work. So I had to move on.
Yep.
Yep. Yeah. Cause I didn't want anybody, making something and going, well, that was okay.
Yeah.
It had to be like, oh my God, this tastes so good.
Yeah. One time I decided to make, I recently added meat back into my diet. I was vegan for a while and then I added meat back in. But anyway, I decided to do buckwheat chicken strips for my nieces and nephews because I was like, well, that's like a good way. It's like gluten-free. I can just, instead of using breadcrumbs. But unfortunately, it ended up looking like not chicken strips. It literally looked like it literally looked like poop because it was just like chicken strips and just wrapped in buckwheat. And my sisters were like, my kids are not going to eat that. So there's certain things where I'm like, this is a great alternative to like fast food chicken fingers. But then when the reality sets in, I'm like, I have to rework that recipe because my sisters were like, no, this is not going to work.
Yeah. I had one recipe and it's in my book. It's sourdough zucchini quick bread, and I made it. So I put quite a bit of olive oil in my book. So instead of butter for several recipes, I use olive oil
Yeah.
because it's healthy
Same.
and it tastes really good. I love olive oil in this quick bread. And one loaf calls for one egg. I get pasture raised eggs. I'm happy to pay through the nose for those because I know that the hens have a happy life. And my daughter Charlotte, she really wanted me to put as many vegan recipes in the book as I could, and there are a lot. It's like 2/3 of them are vegan, and so I thought, okay, this one will be a good contender for vegan. And I made it over and over and over and over, and I don't know how many times I made that bread without an egg, and it was good. It was good, but I could tell the difference. I could tell from looking at it.
Yeah.
It just didn't look right, I fed it to my group of volunteer seamstresses. We make cloth produce bags. I mean, they all really liked it, but they didn't taste the other one.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just finally said, okay, like I'm just putting it in with the egg because it's really good. And I do mention in the book, I get pasture raised eggs. I mean, industrial agriculture is it's a horror show.
Yes.
It's really, it's just terrible. It's the worst thing we've done to the planet. And I don't eat industrial produced eggs or dairy. But my sister has her own hens, and they eat the compost and they poop all over the place. And last year she moved them because she has a few acres. She has a hen house, and then she has a turkey house at the back, which a wild turkey house, which she's never used. She relocated the hens there and then grew all of her tomato plants in the front yard of the hen house. They live in a hen palace, my sister's hens. Anyway, there's a yard. It's really nice. So anyways, so she grew these giant tomatoes in the yard where the hens had pooped and stomped around and eaten the compost. And I don't think most people would have a problem with eating Michelle's eggs.
Yeah, I have, that's something my husband and I discussed when I started putting back meat in our diet. I do have the privilege to be able to, there's a local grocery store and there are a few butcher shops where I know where my meat is coming from. I realize that's not the case for everyone, and I would prefer, if you are, if you need those nutrients, I'm a big advocate of, like, if it's not organic, and yes, maybe it comes from an industrial, but if that's all you can afford, eat the food because you need the nutrients. But if you can afford it, and for me, I can, and it's like I make a choice. Instead of maybe shopping for clothes all the time or, going out to dinners, my husband and I have made the choice to maybe invest in good meat once in a while. So it's about choices you make, and I realized because we end up spending probably as much as, a normal average family, I just decide where and what I spend on. So I think that's an interesting thing.
Oh yeah. I don't buy really anything. I'm sitting on a secondhand sofa I got from Restore. I love the Restore. It's Habitat for Humanity's store. I love this sofa. I'm wearing my daughter's pants that she didn't want anymore, and my other daughter's hoodie that is kind of ratty. So I don't spend money on things like that, but I spend my money on good food.
Same.
And I mean, I know I'm really lucky that I can do that. And I am completely spoiled here in Northern California because I have access to all that stuff. And I know not everybody does. We have a crazy food system.
Yeah.
We have a crazy, completely unjust food system. There are few people, few companies that are controlling everything. There was an article in The Guardian recently, and it said something like I put it on Instagram. There are 4 companies in the US that control about 79% of the products in the typical US grocery store. And it's all highly processed stuff. Yeah. And so I said, my farmer's market has more consumer choice than a giant US supermarket. Yeah. And the farmers, they get 90 cents on every dollar you spend at the farmer's market because you're buying directly from them. And at the grocery store, they get about 15 cents.
Yeah.
And at the supermarket, the farmers get about the same amount of money that they have been for, 30 years. So it's a terrible system.
Yeah, it really is. And I love that you shared that. You guys listening, if you have access to a farmer's market, 90 cents to the dollar, that's amazing. For me, I think supporting the farmers is so important because, I don't live on the land where I can grow my own produce and milk my own cows. I do not have that luxury, so I depend on farmers for food. And I think I think we undervalue them sometimes because it's so important.
Oh, yeah. Well, and the farmers, the smaller farms, they're more diverse and they're not growing big, huge monocultures. So they're treating the soil better and, our soil is in big, big trouble.
Yeah. Agree. I'm realizing like we've spoken for an hour. I'm like, wow, that went by really fast, Anne-Marie. This has been wonderful. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you would like to share with my listeners?
Oh, well, maybe we already covered this, but if you're thinking about living more sustainably and reducing your waste, just don't even try to be perfect. Just forget about that. Just let it go and just try. Well, actually, another thing I would say, I don't know I don't think this is off topic, but if you're freaking out about the climate crisis, join a climate justice group, a climate focus group like 350.org.
Yeah.
Because the IPCC report was terrible, but not a surprise. The part that has me really upset is that nothing is changing. There's not changing fast enough. I shouldn't say nothing is changing it's not changing fast enough at the top. Yeah. All of us down here, we're all really upset and we're pushing for change, which is great. So if you are one of those people, I would highly recommend you join a climate focus group. I heard from a lot of people when the report came out saying, I just feel despair. What can I do? So that was one thing I kept telling people. Well, and I keep telling people.
Yeah, I think we underestimate the value that we have as citizens, not only consumers. This is a wise consumer, but I think, reaching out to your local representatives and signing up and supporting organizations like 350. Also reading the IPCC, like understanding what's happening. I think it becomes more real when you start to really understand why this matters. Because honestly, Anne-Marie, this isn't off topic. Everything is connected. Fashion, what we eat, what we put on our skin.
Oh, absolutely.
It's all part of this system. And I think the more people we can get behind, even look at plastic. 20 years ago, we weren't necessarily talking about plastic the way that it is now. And now, people are, big companies are slowly starting to be like, oh, we should try to, like HP, don't they have like a recycled plastic computer, so it's like bigger companies are starting to, they may not be perfect. There may be some greenwashing. I get that, but at least they're listening and they're, tiny bit moving the needle more than they had in the past.
Yeah. The plastic thing, when we started, it was rarely in the news.
Right.
And now it's in the news every day.
Right. I understand there's like a big doom and gloom, but I really like to bring hope to people when it comes to this because, the more people we get on board, and even if it's a small little change that you make, it really does over time add up. So, well, isn't it that quote you have? Like it doesn't take one person to live perfectly. It takes, what is your quote? I should have written that down.
What is it? We don't need a handful of people doing zero waste perfectly. We need millions of people doing it imperfectly.
Exactly.
So, I just put that in a blog post I wrote a couple of years ago. I wrote that in a blog post, and then immediately someone made a meme of it and put it on Instagram, and then I was like, just saw it explode. Really? And I thought, gee, I would have, if I'd known that was going to happen, I would have worked on it harder and said, billions, and, anyway. Because I mean, I had no idea that, but apparently, it struck a chord with people.
It really did. That is like the zero waste quote of the day. Like it is everywhere.
Yeah, I see it everywhere. It's in my feed. People tag me all the time on Instagram, and it's these nice memes with the quote.
Well, it's a meaningful quote, and it really truly holds to everything that you're working on, everything we've talked about. So, well, Anne-Marie, this has been so wonderful. I want to be mindful of your time. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Where can my listeners find you?
Oh, well, I have a blog. It's ZeroWasteChef.com, and I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, all at ZeroWasteChef. So yeah, you can find all kinds of information on those.
And I will give a shout out to your cookbook, The Zero Waste Chef. It's really wonderful. Really, I can see the work you've put in here. The recipes are great. I'm very excited to try out some of the things that I've always wanted to make, like the lemon preserve. These are things I still buy because I don't know how to make them. And I saw you had the recipe in this. So highly recommend. You guys can get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, on your website, correct? Where can they buy this book?
Oh yeah, anywhere you buy books.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have links on my website to all the big ones, and also bookshop.org. That's for independent bookstores. So you can get it at your independent bookstore, or you can buy it online through Bookshop, and a portion of the sale goes to your independent bookstore. And ask for it at your library too.
Yeah.
Because
that's my favorite. For sure. Speaking of the Zero Waste Chef, get it at your local library. Well, Anne-Marie, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. And honestly, thank you so much for being such a big part of my conscious living journey. Big inspiration and influence in my life. And I highly recommend for everyone to check out your book, as we discussed, and to check out your blog. Thank you for the work you're doing. I really appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you, Madeline, for having me on here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, have a wonderful evening.
Oh, thank you. You too.
All right, friend, that about wraps it up, but this convo does not have to end here. I would love to hear from you, so please send your questions and comments my way. And if there's a topic you want to hear more about, send me a DM on Instagram at The Wise Consumer, or email me at hello@thewiseconsumer.com, and let's chat. In the meantime, could I ask you to do me a huge favor, please? I'd really appreciate it if you could take a few minutes out of your day to subscribe to my show and leave me a review if you haven't already. You can do so in the iTunes app. It's that purple icon that comes preloaded on most smartphones, but I've also linked it up in the show notes if you're not sure how to access it. Anyway, that wraps it up for today. So until next time, friend, be safe, stay healthy, and take care. Hi, friends. As always, just ending this episode with my obligatory disclaimer. Please remember, The Wise Consumer is intended for educational purposes only. The content being shared here should not be used as a substitute for professional care by your healthcare provider. I am not a qualified medical expert, nor do I pretend to be, so please note that the content and research I share and explore on this podcast is not intended to treat or diagnose you. If you have any medical questions, concerns, or wish to make changes to your diet, please speak to your physician or any qualified healthcare professional for that matter. The Wise Consumer may not be held responsible for your health, dietary, or lifestyle decisions. I am simply here to encourage you to seek healthier, more eco-friendly, and conscious alternatives. While the Wise Consumer podcast offers information from many sources, the opinions expressed are solely those of the Wise Consumer and not those of any affiliate or other entity. Additionally, while I always do my best to source and research the most up-to-date and accurate information, I realize science is continually evolving. If you come across any scientific information that is blatantly incorrect, please kindly email me at hello@thewiseconsumer.com. And finally, this podcast and any other offerings of the Wise Consumer may contain copyrighted material, the use of which has not always been specifically authorized by the copyright owner because it is being used for educational purposes. If you wish to use copyrighted material from this podcast or any other offerings of the Wise Consumer for purposes of your own that go beyond fair use, you must obtain permission from the copyright owner.